The end times. Why should I care? So I have an overview of what I'm going to talk about. Someplace in the future, we're going to have something called the tribulation time. After the tribulation, there's a 1,000-year millennial period and then judgment time. There's a sorting out process where people are either going to end up in heaven or the burning lake of fire. And then it all begins again with a new heaven and earth. I'm not using all of the scriptures in the Bible that relate to the end times, but mostly the ones that come from my Gentile background. I'm more interested in what might happen to me. We're going to start in Matthew chapter 24, when Jesus' disciples ask him about the end times. And Jesus sends us back to the book of Daniel for a timeline. We go back to Genesis, and we find out that Moses tells us about who the covenant might be made with and why there needs to be a covenant. It all has to do with the land that was promised to Abraham, who inherits it, either Ishmael or Isaac, the Arabs or the Jews. Paul tells us about the rapture and what must happen before Jesus returns in 1st, 2nd Thessalonians. John tells us about the tribulation and judgment in Revelation. Jesus also tells us about judgment in Matthew 25. There's clues about the Antichrist in several places. And Israel, we find out, will be protected for 3.5 years. The first part of the tribulation as part of the covenant, while the tribulation saints, or the Christians, are going to be killed. Second half of the tribulation, I believe, is when Israel is grafted back into the olive tree. We'll take a look at that a little bit. The 1,000 years, the tribulation saints will be resurrected first, and they're going to spend time with Jesus for 1,000 years. So let's get started. We're starting in Matthew 24. It says, Jesus came out of the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he said to them, Do you not see these things? Surely I say to you, not one stone will be left upon another, which will not be torn down. It was a magnificent temple with jewels and gold, and they were very impressed with it. If we take a look back in Daniel 9:25, you'll see how Jesus knew this, the prophecy that this temple was going to be torn down again. He says, so you'll know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again, with plaza and moat, and even in times of distress. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. The crucifixion of Jesus, which hasn't happened yet, but that's coming down the road, and he'll have nothing. And the people of the Prince who is to come, that'll be the Antichrist, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So in the year 70, this is about after the time the Bible had all been completely written, about 40 years after Jesus said that it would, the temple was destroyed by the Romans, fulfilling that prophecy in Daniel 9:25. It says, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus said to them, See to it that no one misleads you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will mislead many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not frightened, for these things must take place. But that is not the end yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. These are the 3 questions they asked Jesus. Now, Jesus could have just said, don't worry about the future. Today has enough problems of its own. But he doesn't. He really says, I want you to understand this end time so that nobody will mislead you. This is why Jesus says you should know about the end times. Then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. At that time many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and mislead many. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Referring to the tribulation saints that will be beheaded. Revelation 24, and I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus and because of the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or his image and had not received the mark on their forehead or on their hand. You know, today we've seen people being beheaded because of their beliefs in Jesus. And I think we're just being prepared for when this really starts during the tribulation. We're being desensitized to these horrific things that are going to happen. It says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which is spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever's on the mountaintop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. So this abomination of desolation, Jesus is pointing us back to Daniel. In Daniel 9:25, we've looked at that already. You'll see that so that you will know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And it will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the Prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. We've seen that already. That's the Roman Empire destroyed it in 70 AD. So the Prince who is to come will come out of the Roman Empire, which includes Europe and Northern Africa. Israel is all part of that Roman Empire. And its end will come in a flood, even to the end there will be a war. Desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. Now this covenant with the many, we're going to talk about who the many are and why there's a necessity for having a covenant. But in the middle of that week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come the one who will make desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So here's a basic timeline that comes out of this Daniel 9:25. We see that from an issuing of a decree, that's the beginning of this timeline. He says that until the Messiah, the Prince, will come, this would be Jesus, perhaps riding into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, being declared as the Messiah. That after 7 weeks and 62 weeks, we add those up. Now, the word week here in Hebrew is sevens. So it could be 7 days or 7 years. And when you look at 7 years, that's 483 years from the time that the temple has been, the decree has gone out to rebuild the temple. 483 years until the Messiah. Now, when Daniel got this prophecy, they were living in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar had already destroyed the temple and taken many of the Jews back to Babylon, and they were being held hostage. They were there for 70 years. And during this time, the temple's been destroyed. And so this decree to go rebuild the temple is the starting point for this 70 weeks prophecy. And then it says that the Messiah will be cut off after the 69 weeks. And then it says that the city and the sanctuary will be destroyed again. That happened in 70 AD. And then there was going to be a covenant that's made with the many for 1 week. This is what we generally call the tribulation time. That's where we get the 7 years from. All we know is that the first 3.5 years were part of a covenant. The covenant is broken in the middle, so the second half of the covenant isn't 3.5 years. If you look in Revelation 12, you'll find out that it actually extends a little bit further than 3.5 years. 11. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. How blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains the 1,335 days. And in the middle of the week, he, one who comes out of Rome, the Antichrist, will put a stop to the sacrifices and grain offering. So in order for them to stop the grain offerings, they have to begin. So as part of this covenant, the temple of Israel needs to get rebuilt so that Israel can start doing regular sacrifices so that 3.5 years later they can be stopped. And out of Daniel 11:31 it says, forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. This is what Jesus is referring to back in Matthew 24. And all of this prophecy has come true up to this point except for this last week. And since all of that other prophecy in here has happened exactly as told, we can expect that this last week is going to go exactly as prophesied also. Now, if you look in Ezra 1, you'll find out that now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of earth, and he has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever there is among all of his people, may his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judea, and rebuild the house of the Lord. And God of Israel, he is the God who is in Jerusalem. Every survivor, at whatever place he may live, let the men of that place support him with silver and gold, and with goods and cattle, together with a freewill offering for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. This is the proclamation that began this prophecy in Ezra 1. Revelation 12:4 says, and the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all nations with an iron rod. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that she would be nourished for 1,260 days. At 1,260 days is 3.5 years. There's 360 days in a Jewish year. So Israel is protected by this covenant for 3.5 years. Now if we look at these maps here, there's Israel. These are the descendants of Isaac. In the green are the Arabs. These are the people who are descendants of Ishmael. And so we're going to take a look at the Antichrist, will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. So who are the many, and why is a covenant needed? Well, this is the many. It's the descendants of Ishmael versus the descendants of Isaac. They both, Israel and the Arabs, claim the land that's been promised to Abraham. This is the land from the river in Egypt to the Euphrates River. This is where all the oil land is. This has been promised to the descendants of Abraham. So both the Arabs go back to Genesis 12 and say, this is our land because Ishmael was first born to Abraham. Or the Jews go back and they said, no, this is our land because Isaac was the firstborn legitimate son through Abraham's wife Sarah. And so we claim this land. It's an unsolvable problem until he is going to make a covenant that allows Israel to restart their sacrifices. It says the many are Arabs and Israel. They are at war today over the land promised to Abraham. In order for Israel to begin regular sacrifices in the temple, peace must exist between the two groups. The Antichrist, he will make the covenant. Let's go back over and look at a few things in history in the Old Testament. And starts off here with Abraham. Abraham and his covenant, there were some promises made to Abraham, which includes land, the land that we just looked at. And that land will go to his descendants. We also want to take a look at the temple, because the temple was built by Solomon. Up here, the temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar During 70 years, this is when Israel was in captivity in Babylon. This is when Daniel received that 70 weeks prophecy we just looked at. So the temple was rebuilt following King Cyrus issuing to build a decree. And we ascend up over here, we'll see that the temple continued until the year 70 when it was destroyed by the Romans. Our prophecy says that somewhere in the future, this temple is going to be rebuilt. It isn't today. There has been no temple for almost 2,000 years. One of the reasons is because there is a shrine called the Dome of the Rock that's sitting up on the Temple Mount. This is one of the most holy mosques that are for the Arabs, and they're not going to tear it down to allow the temple to be rebuilt. But when this Antichrist, comes, he's going to look like the Messiah to the Arabs and the Messiah to Israel. And he's going to make a covenant with the two of them that allow Israel to rebuild their temple and start their regular sacrifices. And we take a look at the olive tree that's talked about in Romans 11. So Israel was the olive tree. In Acts 2 and Pentecost, we saw that 3,000 Jews came forward and became the first Christians in the church. But how many Jews were in Jerusalem that day that didn't come forward? We know from looking back at history that there was 12 descendants of Jacob that went down into Egypt. And 400 years later, over 600,000 men came out with Moses. So we went from 12 men to 600,000 men in 400 years. 1,500 more years until Pentecost came. There were a lot more Jewish men than 3,000. Matter of fact, I believe 3,000 was just a very small group of Jewish people who accepted the Messiah. The rest of them, through unbelief, were broken off from the olive tree. And there's also been a partial hardening that's been placed on Israel during this age of the Gentiles. We have our first Gentiles were brought into the Christian church in Acts chapter 10 and Acts chapter 15. We find that the Gentiles come in and at this point they don't become Jewish as part of being Christians, that they have a separate set of rules to operate on. And over time, because the hardness is put on Israel, the church has become almost all Gentile Christians. So when the covenant is made with Israel and the Arabs, would be here during this first part of the tribulation time, Israel is going to be protected. The rest of the world, we're going to find out that the Antichrist goes out and converts the rest of the world to his religion, and anyone who doesn't convert is killed. The covenant gets broken when the sacrifices are stopped, which was in the middle of the tribulation time. And I believe in the second half of the tribulation is when the rest of Israel is grafted back into the olive tree. Because when we take a look at the scriptures that talk about that. And so Romans 11:16 says, if the piece of dough is holy, the lump is also. And if the root is holy, the branches are also, referring to the olive tree. But if some of the branches are broken off, and you, a Gentile, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them and became a partaker of them of the rich root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant towards the branches. But if you are arrogant, remember that it is not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. Quite right. They were broken off for their unbelief. That was all of the Jews during Pentecost, broken off. But you stand by your faith. Do not be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. There is a warning from Paul about seeking to be justified by law. You can fall from grace, would be broken off the branch again. In verse 22 he says, behold, then the kindness and severity of God. To those who fell, severity, but to you, God's kindness, if you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you will be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in unbelief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut off from what by nature is the wild olive tree, and were grafted in contrary to the nature into the cultivated olive tree, how much more will these who have been natural branches be grafted into their olive tree? That's what I believe happens during the second half of the tribulation. Romans 11:25. That's where we find that there's been a partial hardening that's happened to Israel till the fullness of the Gentiles come in. And so all of Israel will be saved. And Luke 14:20 says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are in the midst of the city must leave. And those who are in the country must not enter the city, because these are the days of vengeance, so that these things which are written will be fulfilled. Woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be a great distress among the land and wrath of this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword, and they will be led captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled." So this time, when there are no Gentiles in Jerusalem, I believe is when this is going to be part of this covenant, is going to allow Israel to have Jerusalem and to rebuild their temple, and the age of the Gentiles will be over at the beginning of this tribulation. The Jews will be protected by the covenant, and the Christians will be hunted down and persecuted. The beginning of the second half of the tribulation, we find 144,000 Jews have been sealed. Now we take a look at the timeline in Revelation. First thing we see are the first four seals, the four horses of the apocalypse. During that time, a fourth of the earth is killed by sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. These are things that are going on today. Most of the world is going to be totally unaware that the tribulation has started. All we'll know is that someone has brought peace in the Middle East, that Jerusalem now has started their sacrifices in the temple. Other than that, just normal things going on. There's going to be a lot of people killed, but by normal things. We see the fifth seal is basically waiting for all the tribulation saints to be killed. They'll be killed by beheading. The sixth seal is when the Antichrist enters into the temple, declares himself God, and stops the regular sacrifices. The wrath of the Lamb begins. There's the great earthquake, the sun turning black, the moon like blood, stars fall from the sky. Same description Jesus has in Matthew 24:29. Following the sixth seal, we see an interlude. There's 144,000 sons of Israel are sealed as bondservants of God. And we also see the multitude of the tribulation saints in white robes are in heaven. So in this first 3.5 years, we find, and looking in the book of Revelation, we're going to see the scripture for that in a minute, but the beast of the sea is the Antichrist. He gets his power from the dragon, who is Satan. And he is empowered for 42 months, which happens to be 3.5 years, the first half of the tribulation. Gets his power from the dragon. He makes war with the saints and he overcomes them. This is the hunting down and killing of the Christians. All on earth will worship the beast whose names is not written in the Lamb's book of life. So the tribulation saints' names are in the book of life, and they will not worship the beast, and anyone who does not worship the beast will be killed. The beast will make a covenant with the many for 7 years. Israel begins regular offerings and sacrifices in the temple of Jerusalem, and they'll be living a very normal life like in the days of Noah. The rest of the world is going to be not a normal world. The beast of the earth, who is the false prophet, is going to join the beast of the sea, the Antichrist. He makes all of the earth worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. Now that's interesting because Jesus had a fatal wound and was healed and rose from the dead. I think that perhaps if the Antichrist is going to look like the Messiah to Israel, that the Antichrist could completely relive the life of Jesus being born in Bethlehem, which was part of the Roman Empire, could follow all of the prophecies of the Messiah, and Israel would look at this Antichrist and be fooled as thinking he is the Messiah. The Arabs are also looking for a Mahdi, a Messiah. And they look in the same Bible that the Jews look in, and they also may be convinced that the same person is their Mahdi or Messiah. And that would make sense that between those two religions that both worship the God of Abraham, that this Messiah could bring peace between the two of them and allow the sacrifices to start. We see here in Revelation 6:6, "Then I saw the Lamb broke one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures saying as with the voice of thunder, 'Come, look.' And behold, a white horse." This is the first seal. "And he who sat upon it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer." It's more than likely is the Antichrist. "When he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, 'Come.' And another red horse went out, and to him it was who sat upon it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him." This is part of the fourth of the earth population being killed by war. "Then he broke the third seal, and I heard the third living creature saying, 'Come.' And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat upon it had a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, 'A quart of wheat for a denarii, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarii, and do not damage the oil and the wine.'" This could be about the famines, that people are going to be starving to death. "And when the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard a voice from the fourth living creature saying, 'Come.' And I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat upon it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and famine and pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth." Those are all things that are going on today. It's not going to look like we're in a tribulation time at all. The fifth seal. "When the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of their testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, 'How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on all who dwell on earth?' And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were killed, even as they have been, would be completed also." So this is waiting until all the tribulation saints have been killed. Revelation 12 says, "So the dragon was enraged with the woman, and went off to make war with the rest of her children, who keep the commandments of God and hold true to the testimony of Jesus." Now the woman they're referring to is Israel, and the child is Jesus. The dragon cannot touch the Israel because of the covenant, but they went off to make war with the Christians, or the tribulation saints. "The beast of the sea, and the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority, and I saw one of the heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. They worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?' There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months." It's 3.5 years, the first half of the tribulation. It was given to him. "And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And it was given to him to make war with the saints and overcome them." So the beast of the sea is the Antichrist. He's going to be the one who kills the Christians while Israel is being protected. "And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. All who dwell on earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain." So all of the tribulation saints have got their names written in the book of life. They will not worship the beast or as we'll see, not take the mark of the beast, and they'll be killed. The beast of the earth, the false prophet. He exercises authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And we've seen that twice in here. It's like Jesus had a fatal wound and he was healed. I believe maybe the Antichrist could totally mimic the life of Jesus, fulfill all of the biblical prophecies. And that way Israel would believe that he is truly the Messiah, and also the Arabs would see that perhaps he was also their Messiah. So he would be the person who could bring peace between the descendants of Isaac and the descendants of Ishmael. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which were given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image of the beast, who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak, and cause as many as who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So the tribulation saints will not worship the image of the beast. That's why they'll be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free and the slaves, to be given the mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. 2 Thessalonians, Paul talks about what's going to happen before the Lord returns. He says, and then the lawless one, the Antichrist, will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with his breath of his mouth, and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. That's Revelation 19, when the false prophet and the Antichrist are thrown into the burning lake of fire. That is, the one who is coming in accord with the activity of Satan. We've seen that the Antichrist, the beast of the sea, gets all of his power from Satan, the dragon, with all power and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, so as to be saved. For this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence, so that they will believe what is false, in order that they all may be judged who did not believe the truth, but took pleasure in wickedness. So when God sends us deluding influence over the world, everyone who's not in that Lamb's Book of Life will convert to this false religion. All believers in Jesus should be dead by the end of the fifth seal. They're either asleep prior to the beginning of the tribulation or are beheaded during the first half of the tribulation. When the Antichrist enters the temple and declares himself God, he has converted the entire world to his religion. Everyone on earth except Israel, because of the covenant, have taken the mark of the beast and have worshipped the image of the beast. The second half of the tribulation is about Israel being grafted back into the olive tree. And just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it will also in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating and they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. On that day, the one who is on the housetop and whose goods are in the house must not go down to take them out, and likewise the one who is in the field must not turn back. Whoever seeks to keep his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. I tell you, on that night there will be two in one bed, and one will be taken and the other will be left. There will be two women grinding in the same place, one will be taken and the other will be left. Two men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other will be left. So during the first half of the tribulation, only the Jews will be living a normal life under the protection of the covenant. Yep, hold it right there. What happened to the rapture of the church? You haven't mentioned that yet. So this is the rapture you're referring to. Paul is the only one that really describes it. Jesus alludes to it by the two people, and one will be taken and one will be left, but Paul explains it. 1 Thessalonians 4:13 says, "We do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, and with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we, who are alive and remain, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore comfort one another with these words." So we're the last living people that are Christians in the book of Revelation. I would believe those would be the ones that would be alive when the Lord returns. 2 Thessalonians 2, Paul talks about what's going to happen prior to the Lord returning. He says, "Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together with him." That's referring back to what he talks about in 1 Thessalonians. "So that you not be quickly shaken from your composure or be disturbed either by a spirit or a message or a letter as from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord is come." That gives me a feeling that someplace we're going to uncover some archaeological lost letter from Paul or from one of the apostles saying that the Lord has already come. There's a warning there not to listen to it. "Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first." That's a great falling away of the faith. Not an end-time revival, but a falling away of the faith. With that deluding influence that God's going to put on to believe the lie, the end-time revival will be all flocking to the Antichrist. That's a false revival. The other thing that happens before Jesus returns is the man of lawlessness is revealed, the Antichrist, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. That's in the middle of the tribulation. That'd be 3.5 years in. When he does that, he's going to stop the regular sacrifices, declare himself as being God. The covenant is broken, and now it'll be time for the Antichrist and his false religion to battle against Israel in the second half of the tribulation. So who are the last believers left alive? Wouldn't those be the ones? "Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air." The sixth seal. "I looked, and he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by the great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth and the great men and the commanders and the rich and the strong and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?" This is the first time the earth realizes what's going on. This is the one that's coming out of the heavens. Jesus also talks about Matthew 29. He says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days," which will be the first half of the first 3.5 years, "the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of heaven will be shaken." Daniel 11:31 says, "Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, do away with the regular sacrifices, and they will set up the abomination of desolation." I think that is what brings on the sixth seal. Matthew 24, it says, "Therefore when you see the abomination of desolation which is spoken of through Daniel, the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand that those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, those on the housetops must not go down to get things out of the house, whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. Woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, or ever will be. Unless those days have been cut short, no life would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, these days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, beware, behold, there is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe him. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance." The interlude, following the sixth seal. After this I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth or the sea or on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, having the seal of the living God, and he cried out with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was granted to them to harm the earth and the sea, saying, "Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads." And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from every tribe of the sons of Israel. These are the ones been protected during the covenant, the first 3.5 years. From the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed, and from the tribe of Reuben, 12,000, from the tribe of Gad, 12,000, from the tribe of Asher, 12,000, the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000, from the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000, the tribe of Simeon, 12,000, the tribe of Levi, 12,000, from the tribe of Issachar, 12,000, from the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000, from the tribe of Joseph, 12,000, from the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000. There's the 144,000 that came out of the first half of the covenant. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could count, from every nation, all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And one of the elders answered, saying to me, "These who are clothed in white robes, who are they? And where have they come from?" I said to him, "My Lord, you know." And he said to me, "These are the ones who came out of the great tribulation saints. And they have nursed their robes and have made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him night and day in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. They will hunger no longer, nor thirst any more, nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any beast. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." We as Gentiles will not see the sixth seal or interlude. I'm skipping the seventh seal, the seven trumpets, and the seven bowls, because we will not live to see it. Revelation 19, Jesus returns with a heavenly army and kills everyone. The beast and the false prophet are taken to the burning lake of fire. And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat upon it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and wages war. His eyes are a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems, and he has written on him a name which no one knows except himself. He is clothed in a white robe dipped in blood. His name is called the Word of God. And in the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with an iron rod, and he treads the winepress and the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. And on his robe and on his thigh He has the name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Revelation 19:19, I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war against him who sat upon the horse and his army. And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet who prophesied the signs in his presence, and by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast, and those who worshipped his image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire, which burns with brimstone, and the rest were killed with the sword which came out of the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. Revelation 20, the tribulation saints are resurrected, live 1,000 years while Satan is bound. There's a final battle when Satan is cast into the burning lake of fire. Judgment of all dead based on their deeds. All who do not have their names written in the book of life are thrown into the lake of fire. Then I saw the thrones and they who sat upon them, and the judgment was given to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of the testimony of Jesus and because of the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or the image and not received the mark on their forehead or on their hand. These are clearly the saints that came out of the first half of the tribulation. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who has part in the first resurrection. Over these the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and Christ and will reign with him for 1,000 years. It is a real honor to die for Christ during that first half of the tribulation. When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations, which in the four corners of earth, and Gog and Magog, to gather together for war. The number of them is like the sand of the seashore. And they came up upon a broad plain of the earth, and they surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they will be tormented day and night forever. So at the end of the 1,000 years, the saints are still alive, the last people living on earth. They are the last living believers before judgment. Actually, the last living people on earth. They are the tribulation saints. Perhaps this is when the rapture occurs. 1 Thessalonians, so we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds who meet the Lord in the air. And he says, this is the one who sows. The good seed is the Son of Man, and this field is the world. And as far as the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the tares are the sons of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil, and the harvest at the end of the age are the reapers are angels. So just as the tares are gathered and burned with fire, so shall be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks of those who commit lawlessness, and will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous shall shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. Revelation 14:14, and I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and sitting on the cloud was one like the Son of Man, having a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, because the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he who sat upon the cloud swung his sickle into the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, and he had a sharp sickle. And another angel, the one who had power over fire, came out from the altar, and he called out with a loud voice to him with a sharp sickle, saying, put in your sharp sickle, and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, because her grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle to the earth and gathered the clusters from the vine earth and threw them into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood came out from the winepress up to the horses' bridles for a distance of 200 years. Yep, I know. 200 miles, not years. So the first angel takes all the believers, the second angel takes all the unbelievers. Revelation 20, I saw a great white throne, and he who sat upon it, in whose presence earth and heaven fled away. There was no place found for them. And I saw the dead, and the great and the small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged from the things which were written in the books, according to their deeds. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, every one of them according to their deeds. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Matthew 25 says, Then the king will say to those on his right, Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat, and I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in, naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then he will say to those on his left. So the first half there was people who loved their neighbors as themselves. They were going to be the righteous. The second one, in verse 21, he says, Then he will say to those on the left, Depart from me, accursed ones, into eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Forever and ever, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. These go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life, being judged by their deeds. Those who are seeking to be justified by works will be judged by their deeds. The reference is 1 Corinthians 3:11. For no man can lay a foundation other than the one that was laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if a man builds upon a foundation with gold and silver, precious stones, wood, hay, each man's work will become evident, for the day will show it, because it is to be revealed with fire, and fire itself will test the quality of each man's work. If any man's work which he has built on it remains, he will receive a reward. If any man's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. Those who are seeking to be justified by faith will also be judged by their deeds, but their deeds will have nothing to do with their salvation. In summary, I believe that all of those who are asleep in Christ before the tribulation will wait for the rapture. All of the believers that are alive at the beginning of the tribulation, when the covenant's made with the many, will enter into the tribulation and will all become tribulation saints. Those whose names are in the Lamb's Book of Life will not worship the beast and not take the mark, and they'll all be beheaded. The unbelievers that enter into the tribulation will all worship the beast and be converted to the religion of the Antichrist, and they are doomed for eternity. The second half of the tribulation, we know that Israel's protected for 42 months. The second part of the tribulation, I believe, is about Israel being grafted back into the olive tree. I'm not sure exactly what happens to Israel after that, but again, I'm looking at this from the standpoint of Gentiles. So Revelation 13:8 says, All who dwell on the earth will worship him, the Antichrist, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. So everyone whose name's not in the Lamb's Book of Life will worship him. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So all the tribulation saints will not worship the beast because their name's in the Lamb's Book of Life, and because they don't worship the beast, they will be killed. So all of the tribulation saints will die during this first half of the tribulation. Revelation 14:9 says, another angel, a third one, followed them, saying in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and the image and receives the mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. They have no rest day or night, those who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. So all of the world is doomed. Entering into the second half of the tribulation, we have Israel, and everybody else is doomed. So what happens to Israel during the second half of the tribulation? I'm not sure. Paul says in Romans 11:25, for I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of the mystery, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, just as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will remove ungodliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. From the standpoint of the gospel, they are our enemies for your sake. But from the standpoint of God's choice, they are beloved for the sake of their fathers, for the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. For just as you once were disobedient to God, but now have been shown mercy because of their disobedience, so that these also now have been disobedient, that because of the mercy shown to you, they also may now be shown mercy. For God has shut up all under disobedience, so that he may show mercy to all. Oh, the depth and the riches of the wisdom and the knowledge of God! How unsearchable are his judgments and unfathomable his ways. I'm not worried about Israel. I'm worried about Gentiles who do not love the truth. Be like the Bereans in Acts 17:11 and search the scriptures to see if it is so.